summer and with the Orioles headed back home here for some home cooking and some reasons maybe to go out to the ballpark, Luke Jones joins us now to discuss where we are in this rebuild. Luke, we haven't discussed on a day-by-day basis which relief pitcher went in last night, how they lost the game, how they win the rare wins that they win. Everything here really is about, now that the Adley Rutschman thing is here, we talked about the draft and where the minors are. This is really the reset level, right? I mean, this is the post-Memorial Day, post-draft, all right, the next 4 or 5 weeks, we've got short schedules starting. We've got players moving around. If we're going to move a guy from Delmarva to Frederick to Bowie to Norfolk, this is the time you're starting to think about that and starting to set the second half of the year, because they're not making the playoffs this year, Luke. And the major league games, one of the reasons I don't pay attention to them as much as I did is they don't feel like they matter as much as the minor league games do. And I know you're monitoring all of this. And, I don't know where to begin, up or down, but let's just start with what happens at the top affects the bottom, because we're watching the trade value of all of the current players to say, will there be any deals coming up the next couple of weeks? But really, the drilling down is happening at the minor league level every night, where these young players that they hope will be on this team 2, 3, 4 years from now are getting at-bats and hopefully some good seasoning, right?
Right, and that's really where that's where the donuts are being made right now. That's where the seeds are being planted as far as this organization goes. I mean, I think it's just a case of having to be patient and understanding that it's not going to happen overnight. And as much as you will go and see a single-A pitcher doing really good things, and there are a number of minor league pitchers this year having strong seasons, you understand that doesn't translate to being the Baltimore overnight. So I think as much as it's difficult to look at the major league level and beyond a handful of guys really see encouraging signs, I think there is plenty of interest as far as what the organization is going to do now in terms of, say, where Adley Rutschman's going to begin his professional career. Probably Aberdeen, I would think, for a little while at least. But, you have all the different, this was a very college-heavy draft class for the Orioles. I think that was deliberate in nature as far as just where they are from a baseball operations and scouting standpoint, and understanding that college players you have TrackMan data on and much more reliable statistics than high school players. So I think they veered a little more towards college guys with higher floors and guys that they could get in their system and improve the overall talent level of the organization, even if most of those guys are never going to sniff the major leagues. But there is very much a sense of kind of resetting now. First draft is complete under Mike Elias. Keep in mind, the international signing period comes up at the beginning of July, which was never a factor for the Orioles in the past, and Elias has already said that, they're not going to be knocking it out of the park as far as the biggest of the big signing bonus guys, because most of those guys have been courted for the better part of 2 or 3 years by other major league clubs in the Dominican and other international locales. But he's already vowed, saying we're going to be very active. There are going to be signings. There are going to be signings immediately, and there are going to be signings that follow after that. And it's easily understanding it's a low bar, but easily going to be the biggest international signing class that the Orioles have ever had. So that's going to be the next thing. It's not something you're throwing a party over, because we don't know who these players are, but with the hay that they've started to make, understanding that this is an ongoing process. The Orioles right now, from a baseball operation standpoint, from a scouting standpoint, from an analytics standpoint, falls somewhere between functional and optimal right now. It's not optimal, but it's up and running. And they're going to hire more people at the end of this season when contracts run up elsewhere, and people that have been held on to for the time being from the previous regime, probably some of those folks will move on, and maybe a few will stay. So there's still plenty of change and plenty of work to be done from an infrastructure standpoint, but they're up and running now, and that's, that if you're an Orioles fan looking for hope for 2021, 22, 23, and beyond, that's where you have to look to, because you're just not going to see many of those signs, obviously, for a major league club that's on pace to have another sub-50 win season.
Well, this isn't the first year that they've gotten a bunch of ball players in a draft and brought them in and scattered them around and tried to sign them and all that stuff. That's been going on for years. I think we're all trying to figure out how this is different and how the management of what their current assets are. All the Dodgers kids they dealt off for last year, and the Zach Britton fallout and all that stuff. To say where are those kids? Are any of those kids closer? And, this is the time of the year where you and I will get in a car and go to a Bowie or a Frederick to look around. If it feels like a fun night at the ballpark. Certainly feels like a more fun night than the Padres coming in here 2 weeks from now, for me at least.
Yeah, other than just reminiscing a little bit about Manny Machado, I suppose.
I guess.
But, what's interesting when I really look at where the Orioles are right now with their farm system and just looking at 2019 performance, understanding that we're talking about plenty of guys that are really, at least 2-3 years away from the major leagues in some cases, it's funny to kind of look at the players that they acquired in their deadline deals, and there's not a whole lot to write home about. Yusniel Diaz has been hurt. He missed over a month with a hamstring issue. He wasn't really hitting all that well before that. I think they still have high hopes for him, but he's hit some growing pains. And keep in mind, he's a young hitter. I mean, he's even young for Double-A. So we're talking about someone who's only 22 in the Eastern League. That's not an old prospect by any means. So there's still high hopes there. But him... You look at Dean Kramer, he's dealt with an oblique. He was the second biggest piece of that Dodgers deal for Manny Machado. And you look at some of the other names from those various deals. I mean, Dylan Tate's been very disappointing. In fact, he was sent down to Frederick recently. Luis Ortiz has been a major disappointment at AAA. So where my optimism lies much more with Nestor, with looking at their system, isn't really with the guys they acquired at the deadline last year. It's actually some of the guys that they've drafted here recently. And for as much as there was such criticism, so much of it deserved for the player development under, in the Dan Duquette regime and going back way longer before that. We all are well aware. One aspect of what Duquette and Gary Racich, their former scouting director, did the last couple of years was they actually received some pretty high marks for some of the pitchers that they drafted over, say, the last 3 years or so. And when you look at some of those guys, not just D.L. Hall and Grayson Rodriguez, former first-round picks, but some other guys that were drafted somewhere in the neighborhood of, whether it was the second or third round, the 10th round, somewhere of that nature. But you look at some of those guys, and some of those guys are really showing well. Zach Lowther, Blaine Knight, you go down the list. Brennan Hanafy was good last year. He struggled a little bit more this year. But you look at some of those other names, and Drew Rom was just named their minor league pitcher of the month for May. Michael Ballman. You go down the list, and they've collected a list of, I would say, somewhere in the neighborhood of 8 to 10 guys, and most of those guys...
all those names you mentioned, like a guy like Rom, the question now is, at what point do we see him in Bowie? At what point do we see him in Frederick? And that's when they sort of graduate, and I would think that would be part of the news between now and the All-Star break is once a week somebody's going to graduate from somewhere to somewhere else. I mean, that's all we got to hang on when they lose 3 out of every 4 nights,
Right. No, I hear you loud and clear, and I think that's where it's a little more, it's hard to say as far as how Elias is going to proceed. I think if we learned nothing from what they did at the end of spring training, remember, Austin Hayes had a huge spring training for them, but he was sent to AAA and before he ended up injuring his thumb. But what was the rationale for that? Elias said he'd never played at Norfolk before. They weren't going to just rush him based off of, one, what the previous regime tried to do 2 years ago, and two, off of the fact that we're talking about 40 to 45 spring training at bats. They just weren't putting stock into that nearly as much as how he performed at Bowie last year, and the fact that he had never played at AAA. Chance Sisco they sent down after a strong spring. So if that's any indication, you do wonder if some of these minor league pitchers they're going to be a little more deliberate with. And people will say, okay, well, they're trying to slow their service clock. And look, Could they get to that point with Grayson Rodriguez in a year or two? Sure. But
I look down and I just look at the numbers, right? Like, I fly in on this stuff. Kid's 19 years old, right? Like,
right.
Literally, Rom and Rodriguez are 19 years old at Delmarva. You know, how quick do you want to move them to Bowie or Frederick or wherever? And even though they're dominating in a league full of 22, 23, and 24-year-olds, it's exactly what you want to see. This is where Mike Elias is going to earn his money, and where Meidel and these guys that have been doing this for 12, 15 years, not that Buck wasn't, not that Dan Duquette wasn't, but I think there's a different sense of job security here. There's a different sense of what's going on with this kid's elbow, what's going on with this kid's real life, to say we really want a 19-year-old to be in the big leagues at 23 and be awesome. And how can we bake that cake to say in 2023 we're going to have 6 or 8 of these guys on the big league team and be able to win baseball games?
Right. And that's where there's nurturing, there's research, there's analytics. I think one thing the Orioles have done, to their credit, over the last 6 weeks or so, they've had some minor league players actually come out to the ballpark and meet with the media, and they get to meet Brandon Hyde and the major league coaching staff. We're talking about guys who weren't in major league spring training, guys that are at lower levels of the minor leagues. But talking to a couple of those guys, and I think it was Blaine Knight, who was a draft pick for them last year, has already been promoted up to Frederick after starting the season at Delmarva and pitching exceptionally well. Now, he was a college pitcher, so he's someone who's a little bit older, but still just 22, third-round pick last year. But even just his brief time in the organization, he said it really is telling with the amount of information minor leaguers are getting now compared to in the past. And some of that just has to do with what pitches to throw against what type of hitters, what pitches to throw in certain situations, and what pitches you're more successful throwing. For example, there have been guys who, and this has been the case a little bit at the major league level, a couple guys have thrown change-ups more frequently than they have in the past. Andrew Kashner is an example of that, and he's had some success with that, even if the overall body of work is nothing to write home about.
Well, you can see that there's been a philosophical change to some degree.
But you want guys to be aware and have the information that's going to help them do their job better. And that's really becoming the new. We've talked about analytics for 15 years now, right? Billy Beane and Moneyball made this thing pop back in the early 2000s to the point where a team like the Oakland A's can compete with heavyweights from a payroll standpoint. But the big revolution now is much more on the player development side, and teams that are using TrackMan and Edgertronic cameras, and it's much more on player development. Yes, players have to have a baseline of talent. There's no disputing that, but what's really becoming the new revolution as far as young baseball players is the ability to develop these guys more effectively, and that's where you see what Sig Meidel did and the Astros did before the new regime came to Baltimore. That's where they did talk about a growth mindset and talked about some of the qualitative information and makeup and personality and things of that nature, which Billy Beane's era of Moneyball completely was dismissive of qualitative and anecdotal data and makeup and things of that nature. They wanted it to be strictly data. They wanted quantitative information, and that's it. Now they're finding it needs to be both, and that's where scouting is becoming a little more emphasized after maybe being a little de-emphasized. Not that it's ever gone away, but the teams that are truly enlightened are understanding that, yeah, there is a lot of value to that because you want those players who have a growth mindset that are going to care about their craft enough to seek out information, use that information, try some new methodologies. I think Trevor Bauer is someone who's gotten a lot of publicity in baseball. Personality traits that aren't necessarily likable aside, but he's someone who has invested in himself a great deal when it comes to the high-definition cameras and things of that nature to really improve his craft, and you're just seeing more and more of that with baseball in general. So I think everyone is really getting on a level playing field in terms of analytics, and the Orioles being one of the teams that are hopefully now finally getting up to speed with everyone else. But I think the new advances and the new edges that teams are going to gain here in the coming years is how well they're able to truly develop, not just find talent. Finding talent is one thing, but developing it is another. And I think some of these teams that are able to use this, they're taking a very scientific approach, and this is proprietary information, so they're not going to necessarily give away all their secrets to media and talk about it with fans. But I can just tell you there's some really interesting things going on, whether it's radar, whether it's high-speed definition cameras, whether it's chips that they're putting in bats. I mean, that's something that the Orioles have been doing with some of their minor leaguers to track bat path and things of that nature. I mean, it's a really different animal, and I mean, it's really a game that's, we've talked about it a lot at the major league level with how it's being played and, velocity and launch angle, things like that, which, fairly you can ask whether it's truly good for the entertainment portion.
Well, that's what I've been asking all along, right? I mean,
but that said,
but whether it's creating a better baseball player and a better strategy on the inside, sure. It's just
whether it's more palatable to watch, whether it's more entertaining to watch, and that's something that people have talked about. I mean, and it's tough because you don't want to stifle intellectual development. I mean, that's a terrible message to send, really, in any walk of life. But it is something that, as a baseball fan, I mean, you and I, we joust all the time about.
By the way, though, they did implement the infield fly rule, which goes. Right.
Yeah.
So they give you a little baseball breakup there. That's true, right? I mean, the infield fly rule should be a triple play, right? It should be your get out of jail free when you pop the ball up first and second, right? That should be end of the inning. But we stopped that because that wasn't a cool way to do things. That wasn't an interesting way to have baseball played, right?
Yeah, but it really is fascinating, though, the things that are being done now to develop talent. And, I mean, this is, colleges are embracing analytics more. Like I said, one reason I think the Orioles leaned a little more heavily on college players than they typically have isn't just a new regime, but I think probably just confidence level in the data and TrackMan type of information that they can get from all these ballparks where they have Doppler radar that can track player movement and spin rate and launch angle and all those different things.
Still can't make it stop raining, by the way.
Well, yes, that's very true. But it all is, I mean, if you're someone that's really fascinated in process, even if you acknowledge, and like me, I've acknowledged, I don't know how good all of this stuff is for the entertainment aspect of baseball, and ultimately at the end of the day, it's an entertainment industry, but it really is fascinating to kind of read up on what teams are doing. And I ordered a new book that's going to be my vacation reading in a few weeks that is talking about that revolution as far as player development being kind of the new, as much as everyone focused on analytics and just the information, now it's much more the scientific methodology and things of that nature with actually developing these players, not just trying to find talent.
All right, so this is where I can jump in here and have a little fun with you on this topic because we're building the $6 million baseball player. We're building the better baseball player using all this science and data. Luke, it's just come to me as a 50-year-old guy, and this is just like in the last 6 months of going to concerts, that when I go to a concert now, they can make any band on pitch, right? Like there's never a sour note when I go to a show anymore. If the band's old enough and falling apart enough, they can fix it. Yeah. And I don't like it. And now when I hear it, I hear that fake music harmonizer. I don't even know what it is. I have to ask my musician friends more about it. But when a band is too perfect live, it really doesn't make me want to go back, and I hear it. And it almost tastes like something funny in a Diet Coke or like it just has something about it that you're like, I don't – like sometimes when you get like an artificial banana flavoring or it just rubs you the wrong way.
Right.
And I think that's part of this baseball thing when I see the shifting and I hear about the ultra nerd statistical part of all of this. I don't know that it really makes it better when I'm there, in the same way that when they fix a band's harmonies, that I wouldn't prefer them to sing a little out of key, that made it sound a little more live, a little more real, a little more authentic.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting analogy. It's just, the people who hate CDs and digital, and they still have turntables, and they love listening to vinyl, I mean, hey, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I want to be very clear about this, and perhaps I'm guilty of sometimes coming across as, having new ideas about baseball, and, I'm someone who doesn't think much of the sacrifice bunt and plays like that because it's, Dad is
because
kind of
you've read up on it. You know better, right? Literally.
Sure, but I think that it is important to note, and I'll fully admit this, I think the game itself is being played at a more, and it sounds counterintuitive because everyone thinks, strikeouts and home runs. I think the game is being played at a higher and more sophisticated level than it ever has been played. And that's not to be disparaging of players of previous eras. That's not to say players of previous eras wouldn't play at an incredibly high level today, but I just think the research, the analytics, the scientific method, frankly, being used, the game is being played at a more sophisticated, higher level, velocity, players stronger, all those different things we've talked about at various points over the last 20 years, in a kind of a gradual evolution. But that said, I'm not at all certain that what today's game is a better product than what we saw 15, 20, 25, 30 years ago. And I'll also say this, and I want to be fair about it too. There were also some pretty crummy periods of time in baseball in the 20th century. Just go look at the numbers and tell me. Go look at the number of light-hitting corner outfielders, and you wonder why pitchers put up the numbers that they did at that point in time. The competition is more difficult now than it's been as far as an at-bat to at-bat, night-to-night basis than it's ever been. But, again, does that make the best, most entertaining product? I think that's very much up for debate, and that's speaking as someone who loves new information, embraces new information, but I do worry sometimes that we're not that you're outsmarting yourself, because these teams are trying to win. I mean, that's what it comes down to. I mean, you think the Houston Astros cared very much of things that they were doing to put themselves back in a position where they were able to win a World Series, that it wasn't as entertaining as, say, a hit and run 30 years ago? They're not thinking about it in terms like that, but you do wonder how much ends up being too much, and I think we see that on some levels, but I think there's also opportunity to embrace some of this new stuff, because I think some of it's very interesting, and you end up getting guys who remake themselves. Dallas Keuchel, who finally has found a free agent home. He was someone who was very famously mediocre in the Houston Astros system, and he had a growth mindset and became a Cy Young Award winner. I mean, we're seeing it on a much lower scale, but it's kind of been fun to see this year with the Orioles, John Means pitch the way he has. I mean, this was a guy that a year or two ago, people in the organization had no interest in even calling him up to give him a look, and he's been the Orioles' best starting pitcher this year. Does it last? I don't know. Probably not. He's probably a reliever long term, but he's embraced getting better. He's sought outside help. He's throwing his changeup more because, he was kind of taught to do that and encouraged to throw it more, and you see a guy having success. So the Orioles need many, 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 many more stories like that on, to higher degrees, but it is kind of interesting to see how this thing is evolving, and they have a long way to go, but definitely, if you're willing to look and read up on it and look at minor league numbers, you are seeing some things to be encouraged about. Again, it's just going to take some time here in Baltimore, that's for sure.
Luke Jones joining us. He'll be at the ballpark all week, all night, all day. Rain delays, extra innings. That's what he does. You can find him out at Baltimore Luke and Luke at WNST.net. You can find me, Nasty, at WNST.net. Baltimore Positive launched. Alive, well, we're going to be with Mayor Jack Young at Fadley's. Come on down and get a crab cake at Lexington Market, world-famous Lexington Market, on the 20th of June. That's Thursday, June 20th. We've got stuff happening. So many new sponsors. Stay fair with us over in Catonsville on Frederick Road, staying up late in the delicious food. Full circle. Tire and Auto. It's 1995 oil change. You know about that. Dave's been taking care of my wheels since the nasty van days. 410-676 cars. The way to find our friends at Full Circle Tire and Auto. Johnny D's back with us over in Parkville on a Mosky with the delicious shrimp salad and the fresh real turkey. Not that press nine, real turkey. They bake them over like Thanksgiving Day every day over there at Johnny D's. Find them at johnnydslounge.com. And, of course, our friends at Curio Wellness Center in Timonium. I've got the hat on today with the big O in there. That's not for Oriole. That's for Curio and Curio Wellness right on York Road, just south of Timonium Road. If you need some cannabis knowledge, some CBD knowledge, Brian Sanderoff's here to drop it on you. Make sure you stop in, make an appointment. You do not need a card to go in. They are a holistic wellness center in the front. They have spa in the back, and they have cannabis on the side. And you can find them at CurioWellness.com and the Curio Way. The WNST Way is here. Strategic Factory creates my masterpiece. I'm working on some new Baltimore Positive swag. Some hats, some shirts, some cups, stuff I like to do. And we have a beautiful, they made us, Strategic Factory made us this beautiful tablecloth that goes around our set for Baltimore Positive. So I'll be featuring that in front of Freeman Rabowski and Barbara Mikulski and Dutch Rupersberger and everybody else we're going to have on this summer. All right, the BuyAToyota.com Audio Vault is there 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. We do come in crystal clear from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. The morning newspaper ships digitally to your email inbox each and every morning. That's all brought to you by Planet Fitness, where we're getting in shape for the summer. $5 down, $10 a month. It's right around the corner from you. It is Planet Fitness at planetfitness.com. And last but never least, all breaking news happens first on the WNST Tech Service. That's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. Dennis Colatzos will be here on Thursday. Did Friday last week, always on Sunday mornings, and always visiting with me on Mondays. Great to have him aboard. Always brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST, Towson, Baltimore. And we never stop talking Baltimore sports.